I am Vinnie Tortorich. Folks, your good intentions have been stolen, but don't worry. I'm here to help you get them back. You may be soft and stuck at the beginning of this process, but hang in there. Before long, you will be lean and mean, guaranteed. Yeah, Thomas Dolby blinded me with science. And that's exactly what's going to happen here today. We're going to be blinded with science from a scientist or a guy who became a scientist. Let's listen to before we bring this guy on, because this is going to be the best show of the year. It's the first Friday show I record in this year. This is going to be the best show. Let me just tell you guys that up front. Let's get a little, come on, let's go back to 1982. Yeah. Yeah, we're going to talk to Dave Feldman today. He's been on the show before. He was hinting at this experiment the last time he was on, just a couple of months ago. And, he wouldn't really tell me anything, but I know for a fact that he was bursting at the seams because, in fact, he didn't know everything, because when you have a little something called a blind study, even the guy doing the study will not know everything. And even off the air, he was telling me he was bursting. I've never seen anyone bursting at the seams the way this guy was. And it's like he knows something big. And I didn't know how big it was. But boy, it was big. So without any further ado, folks, my good friend, Dave Feldman. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Vinny.
Dave, look, I've already said this is going to be the best show of the year. I might as well stop after this, right? Because the last time you were on, and you weren't very clear with me even off the mic. And it's like, oh, that son of a bitch is being coy. There's something going on here. He knows something. I didn't know about the double. I'm gonna coin a phrase here if I can. A double blind study. Ooh, see what I did there? You see what I did? This is like blind study on steroids. So I'm going to let you take it from here, Dave. I'm just going to shut up and let you explain exactly what happened.
Yeah, sure. And of course, because I know the critics would jump in at just the term blind study, typically a blinded study means that the participants themselves are blind to the data in the study. Double blind means both the participants are blinded and the people running the study, the researchers, are blinded. So technically, this isn't double blind by the traditional term, but you're right in that there's levels of blinding, if you will, between me and the data, and between the general public and me. So the maddening and yet beautiful thing about helping to fund this study is that, yes, I get to be a part of the process. I'm helping to shepherd it. I'm helping to get the people who we're going to talk about in a moment to this study, to this research center called the Lundquist Institute. That's our research partner. They then do the scans, they collect the data, and then I have to wait, as do everybody else, to hear what that data is eventually going to tell us. And when you and I last talked, I was at the point where I could be shared the aggregate data, because I never get to see the raw data. You get to see them at these stages of analyses, usually when it's like right next to when it could be presented on.
Okay.
And we had, by that point in time, all of our participants who are lean mass hyperresponders and borderline lean mass hyperresponders, which means they have not just sky-high LDL cholesterol levels, the so-called bad cholesterol, but they also have high HDL cholesterol and low triglycerides. And those two tend to be associated with good cardiovascular disease risk.
Okay, so Dave, I want you to go back. All right, so folks, the thing I always have to do with Dave, there's a couple of guys I have to do it with. Gary Taubes, Dave, there's a few of them. Perlmutter is one of them. So you're in rarefied air, Dave, is I need you to pretend I'm in second grade. And even more so than that, I feel like since, I know what you're talking about, explain what the study was for anyone. It's the beginning of the year. We have new people that come in January and what have you. Explain what you guys set out to prove. Let's go back to that. Hand feed me a bit, if you will.
Sure. Well, then let's go back even further. If you're brand new to, you'd never heard of Dave Feldman before. I'm actually an engineer. In 2015, I go on a low carb ketogenic diet. My cholesterol goes through the roof, and I'm baffled by this. But I'm also curious because two of my first degree relatives, my dad and my sister, had gone on the diet at around the same time. But while my cholesterol goes through the roof, theirs doesn't. And that seemed odd to me because I hear if your cholesterol levels go high, it's usually genetic when they go that high, because mine went from an average of 110 to 120 LDL cholesterol to like 240. And so for reference, your doctor tends to want you to have your LDL below 100. The average LDL was what mine was most of my life, which is this 120, 130. But if you get up to around 240, or LDL cholesterol around 240, you're in the top 1% of the population, like of the existing data. That's how rare that is.
Right.
And so I became obsessed. In 2015, I became obsessed with trying to understand how this works. And I want to unpack all of that for you here today. Vinnie, I've chatted with you plenty of times on your podcast, so they can reference prior podcasts. But basically, as a software engineer, I thought I saw what looks like a network. The same kind of, literally, the network that runs the internet that we're on right now, the network that's in your house with Wi-Fi, and that there were a lot of things about this process that moves cholesterol in your body that looks like a bunch of different objects, like the internet packets, right? So we're not going to get into all of that. What I will say is, since that time, since 2015 and now 2023, there's been a lot of work piecing those puzzles together. And we now have published what I term the lipid energy model. And it, I believe, explains why my LDL cholesterol went through the roof. And getting back to what I was saying before, why it's also generally coupled with these other changes in my lipid profile, like my HDL cholesterol going up and my triglycerides going down. I often refer to this as the triad of high LDL, high HDL, low triglycerides. So I'm seeing this in 2015. I'm working out the mechanisms, but here's the problem. The problem is I can't seem to get the traditional scientists, the scientists who work on this exact area, lipids. They're called lipidologists. They study lipids. I can't get them interested in people like me because they think we're unicorns. And to be fair, there is not a lot of people who see their cholesterol go up as high as mine did. But also, to be fair, that's because the low carb ketogenic diet was still in its infancy in 2015.
Right.
Now you're seeing it all over the place. You're even seeing it on food products, right?
Yeah.
Though they're not, in my opinion, the best keto food products. But
Oh, I just did a whole documentary on that. That's going to be
yes, I'll bet you did. So as the popularity of keto increased, not just for people who are really overweight to lose weight, who are metabolically challenged, you had a lot of people like me who were more metabolically healthy, and they would concede this than my dad and my sister.
right.
And that was a crucial clue and part of what led to the development of the lipid energy model, but also part of what led to this scientific opportunity, Vinnie, because we have never had people with super high levels of LDL cholesterol, this so-called bad cholesterol, be studied who are also metabolically healthy. So all these folks that are getting studies done on them, they tend to have some form of a dysfunction in how their body is handling lipids. Either they have it because they are metabolically challenged, which also affects your HDL and your triglycerides.
Right.
Or they have some congenital disease such as monogenetic FH, familial hypercholesterolemia, which I know it's a mouthful, but basically it's a disease that results and high LDL, but it results in high LDL because there's an incapability, a broken network, if you will, inside the body. So it's having trouble handling the lipids and the lipoproteins, right? Okay.
Do we know what causes that? Obviously, we don't, right? I mean, it's no way of knowing that, right?
Well, the genetics, I mean, we definitely do. We know, for example, the lack of binding, going back to Brown and Goldstein from 50 years ago, there are scientists that are very famous, two lipidologists, because they were looking at small children, very young children who were exhibiting not just super high levels of LDL cholesterol, but also would get very early heart disease, very early. And I mean, the little girl they were looking at, she had a stable angina at age 3,
Wow.
and she had her first heart attack at age 6. It's very heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And so it's understandable why then, and this carries over to now, why they would say, oh, this hits the strength principle of Bradford Hill criteria, which is a criteria of observational data. That, hey, if you just see like something going really, really high and you see a corresponding outcome along with it, like with smoking, people who are 4-pack-a-day smokers are getting lung cancer way more often than people who aren't, right?
Right.
And so that led them to believe LDL is pathogenic, as in it is literally causing greater disease, particularly this disease of building up plaque in the arteries and causing a heart attack. And that was a catalyst moment. And this is 50 years ago, Vinny. Like this is half a century ago.
Sure. Yeah.
And between then and now, I'm telling you what I'm saying is holding true. We just had these two categories of population. Those people born with these genetic diseases of high levels of LDL, but of a particular category. I may come back to that in a bit. Or those people who have metabolic poor health, metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, severe diabetes, right? They have higher levels of LDL relatively, but they can tend to have very high levels of the thing that carries LDL called ApoB.
Right.
I don't need to get into all of that, but I'll just say that those two categories don't include people with a functional lipid metabolism that's working just fine. At least that seems to be working fine, like mine, and like many people you know who have this triad now when going on a low carb diet. So without getting into all the specifics of the lipid energy model, I would just posit that a lot of these folks who decided they did want to be on a ketogenic diet, a lot of times for medical reasons, because it turned out to be a benefit for them medically,
Sure.
exhibit this profile, this phenotype that I call lean mass hyperresponder. It's the more extreme version of that triad. It's with an LDL of 200 or higher, an HDL of 80 or higher, and triglycerides of 70 or lower. And any of those three by themselves are already super rare. So the
Right.
fact that all three of these have come together, I have to tell you, I was saying back then, how can lipidologists not be interested in wanting to study these folks? They're such a unique profile.
Well, let me be the devil's advocate for them for just a moment. You labeled it as unicorns, right? So you're looking at it going, well, how many of these people are around anyway? And I know there's several around because whenever I do the consults, they end up in my consults because they're going, look, I know this works because I'm not 500 pounds anymore. And I know this works because I'm no longer, my A1Cs are below 5.6. I know this works because I now weigh 250 pounds as opposed to 450. But my doctor wants me on a statin because he says I'm going to drop dead by Tuesday of next week. Right. So I'm talking to these people all the time. And by the way, triglycerides, 60, 70, 80, all the things you just said. I'm talking to these people all the time. We could call them unicorns, and that's fine. Right. But they're out there. And I think scientists just look around and go, not a big enough group. Would you agree with that? Or is it more?
Definitely not now, because as you may already know, coming up to 2023, I now have 2 Facebook groups. a cholesterol code Facebook group that's more general, and a Facebook group just for lean mass hyperresponders.
Oh, wow.
Both of them are now over 10,000 members. 10,000,
That's
right?
crazy.
And without question, the lean mass hyperresponder phenotype I know is getting discussed in lipidology circles. I know this because I have some who I am in contact with who will talk to me about it. And I regularly say back to them, I say, look, the door is open. You can use our Facebook group as a means of recruiting study participants. I would encourage you to.
Right.
But the bottom line was I just couldn't get enough cooperation. I couldn't get enough interest. And the more naive version of me thought that there might be more like research ready money that could help fund it. And that was just it's just false. There's basically two ways you get studies funded. Either it comes through the NIH, which is government related, right?
Right.
Um, or it's industry based. There has to be some business case. There has to be some way it can be monetized. Your study needs to have some potential financial upside, right? And
Mhm.
that's how pharma runs.
Yeah.
Is there needs and to be fair, that's why it should be separate. It's why like a pharma company should be able to pay a research center, and the research center is supposed to be independent. They run the study and then they release it. Well, so from that model I just described, I thought, okay, well, why don't I just see if I can raise the money myself? What if I crowdfund it? And coming from technology, we do that all the time with things like Kickstarter.
Right.
But my technology friends are like, you're crazy because at least with Kickstarter, the people who are funding it, they get something more tangible to them personally. They get, they like a Kickstarter might be for a new game. Okay, so if you're one of the Kickstarter supporters, you get the game. Or if you're at a higher tier, you get to meet the developers in a special event and that kind of thing. If it's for a movie, you get to go to the movie's premiere for free. But here I am, I'm going, I need you to give me 50 to $200,000 and I'm going to get you some data. But to the low carb community's credit, they stepped up. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of, elbow grease on my part to keep the fundraising going, to keep pressing to do little events. At one point, to raise money, I dressed up as a lipoprotein and ran a half marathon. But it worked. We eventually have gotten the money. We have fully crowdfunded it, and now the study is underway. And that study is getting 100 people like the ones I'm describing who have that triad. That's what I was saying at the very beginning was I wanted to get a number of people who are these lean mass hyperresponders or borderline lean mass hyperresponders. It's a little more relaxed, but it's still roughly the same as far as LDL is still very high at 190. In this case, HDL is 60 and above, and triglycerides are 80 and below. And then there's additional criteria on making sure their cardiovascular disease risk is low. So, for example, you can't be hypertensive, you can't have a prior diagnosis
Right.
of cardiovascular disease. But that's also, that's by design. At the end of the day, per the existing lipid hypothesis, our folks should be developing rapid plaque development. Obviously, I'm hoping that's not the case.
Yeah.
But per the lipid hypothesis, you don't, per Brown and Goldstein, the little girl I was just mentioning, they themselves were pointing out, hey, she didn't have any other risk factors. She's not a smoker. She doesn't have a type A personality, all of these things. By that same token, if we have folks who have very high levels of LDL cholesterol, but they don't have FH, and they aren't metabolically challenged. In fact, they're on the other end of the spectrum. Okay, then how much does LDL independently induce a higher rate of atherosclerosis? And so the study, what it's using to detect this is something called a coronary CT angiogram, or CCTA. And a CCTA, what it is you lay down, you get some contrast dye that's put in, and then basically you run through a scanner that looks at basically can map in 3D your geography of
Yeah.
your coronary arteries. And very high resolution. they can see abnormalities, they can see plaque, they can see stenosis, which is like the narrowing of the arteries. And it's better than it's ever been, Vinny, because before now it took a lot of radiation. They had that technology before. It wasn't as high a resolution. Now it's resolution, it's spatial resolution. It can detect plaques as little as 1 millimeter or even lower in some cases. And it can do it on a radiation dosage. It used to be 20 millisieverts. Now it's down to 2 millisieverts. And for reference, that's our day-to-day life for a year, just free living, is about 3.5 millisieverts from radiation from the sun and other things. A mammogram, also for reference, is like 0.5 millisieverts. So this would be like 4 mammograms if you average for like what the radiation dosage is. So the radiation.
Dave, let me just say this. I get that test done once a year. And,
Oh,
people will say, well, why? I have an aneurysm in in my heart. So they have to look at it and make sure it's not growing. So I do that and the CAC test. I do the CAC score and that. I do them both.
yeah. The
You're there
CAC,
anyway. So,
right?
they do one and then they shoot the die and do the second one. That's the way that works for me.
Yeah.
Same
And for
machine.
what it's worth, if I were in your situation, I would be just as comfortable. Like it would have been different if it were the dosage from before, but the me of today, I've already had 2 of them, and I have no risk that would warrant a high frequency of getting these. So yes, that scan, as you know, is a very powerful, very high resolution scan. And what we're doing is we're getting our 100 participants in on day 0, and we're flying them there. We're flying them to the Lundquist Institute. That's the research center we're partnered with that's doing this. They're getting their scan there. And then roughly 365 days later, about a year later, they're going to get flown out there again for a second scan.
Right.
And so when all 100 participants have both scans, we're going to do a final analysis, a longitudinal analysis. That's what it's called when you're doing it over time. And then you do a comparison to see how much the overall plaque volume, non-calcified plaque volume, that's an important thing to emphasize. So not calcified, non-calcified,
Explain
soft.
to the audience, please.
Yeah. So we need to distinguish between soft plaque and sometimes called hard plaque, but basically when we say hard plaque, we mean calcified. Uh, there's a lot of debate currently on exactly how soft plaque becomes calcified, and we don't fully understand all the mechanisms behind it, but we do know that it tends to come with more advanced disease. However, it also tends to associate closely with soft plaque. So it's true you could, for example, have a zero CAC score, which means that you've had 0 detectable levels of calcified plaque, and you could get that from a CAC scan, which is what you just mentioned, Vinny.
Mhm.
And still have not just soft plaque. It's possible to even have a high amount of soft plaque, but that's usually not the case. It's very rare to have a lot of soft plaque and not yet have any calcified plaque. But that said, almost everyone agrees that calcified plaque tends to be a later stage of plaque thing. So with that in mind, we want to not follow calcified plaque because it could be soft plaque is in the process of turning into calcified plaque. We're interested in soft plaque progression because that's almost universally agreed to as new presenting disease process. If your soft plaque is rapidly increasing, you're probably in trouble. You probably have something pretty bad going on.
Right.
But it could, in theory, be that your soft plaque is going down while your calcified plaque is going up, and it's really just remodeling. Even statin companies right now would say that that's likely the case because a lot of statin studies are showing technically an increase in calcification, but they would say that it's actually just a greater degree of consolidation. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think that may be the case. I think I said this on your last podcast, but it's worth repeating, which is whatever your situation was, if you were metabolically unhealthy before and you were developing cardiovascular disease, you were building plaque and so forth, and we knew right now what the perfect intervention was so that it would bring you back to heart healthiness.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think at day one of when you started whatever that protocol was, both your soft and your calcified plaque would then get halted and then go down. I think there's a decent chance that for some period of time, your calcified plaque is going to continue going up. In fact, it may even start at zero and then move up because of that very process I'm talking about, that it's kind of like the roads getting paved over, where the potholes are. Right. So sorry for that little bit of a tangent, but I think it's an important people understand that and why it is that we make this distinction with this study. Okay, so I know that's a long run up, but hopefully everybody was able to follow that.
No, that's easy. That's easy to track. So thanks for doing that. Now, Dave, I want to get into the study with you, but before I do that, I got to show some love to Villa Capelli olive oil. Villa Capelli, love this stuff. I made some eggs this morning. I generally don't do this. I always make eggs with butter. I just do. But I don't know what came over me. I threw a little butter in the pan. I put some Villa Capelli in there. Now, some people don't like eggs cooked in olive oil or coconut oil. I get it. But every now and then, I'll put a little Villa Capelli just to get a different, I guess they'll call it zhuzh. I don't even know what that means, but it sounds right. Villa Capelli works in almost every situation. Now, listen, olive oil is good for your health. Here's the problem. Most olive oil in this country is cut up to 40%, and they can still call it 100% olive oil. Virgin, first pressed, cold pressed, all that's just industry terms. They can cut that shit, and then they got to add perfume so it can smell like olive oil. They got to add color to make it look like olive oil. But basically, you're consuming lampante. That's Italian for seed oils, for lamp oil. That's what that means. Seed oils belong in a lamp, not your body. That being said, Villa Capelli, I can put my name behind it and tell you that it's 100% pure olive oil. Go to villacapelli.com. You can go to vinnietortorich.com and click through the Villa Capelli banner. Easier to remember that way. And at checkout, put in promo code Vinnie, VINNIE, get 10% off. Vinnie, VINNIE, 10% off every single time at Villa Capelli. So go check it out. I use it here all the time. You might want to use it wherever you are. We're talking to Dave Feldman, and without any further ado, he has his double blind study, and he's going to explain why it's a double blind study. I feel like it's some kind of In-N-Out burger that we're talking about here, the Flying Dutchman or something. Explain what happened, because there was another study going on at the same time as your study, right, Dave?
Yeah. Yeah, this was so exciting because I didn't know about it. All of what I told you about in the process of building this study and getting this longitudinal data, what I just told you about. We're doing our own research, we're looking things up, and I was saddened to find that there just are no longitudinal CCTA data on metabolically healthy people in general. Not a single one. And when I dug further, there just wasn't even one that wasn't longitudinal, just a single scan on
Right.
people who are metabolically healthy. Now, if I can rant just a tiny bit, Vinny,
Absolutely.
I figure of all places on your podcast, I could do it.
This is where you rant.
I I genuinely believe this. I believe if we just all that money I was just talking about that the NIH has, if we spent just a quarter, right, just like 25% of the money we put into studies on healthy populations, just observational healthy populations, just long term, find out what their markers do over time, find out what, and new technologies like CCTA, once it was low enough dose, that should have been one of the first things we did. We should have gotten longitudinal data on healthy individuals and find out what their plaque levels do. particularly as you get older, because it's just sort of assumed that at a population level, all of us are going to develop plaque, and it's always going to be endlessly progressive, and it's always going to. And already we would have surveillance data, as they call it, just in the wild data on the association of things like LDL and plaque and metabolically healthy people just by default. If we
Right.
just had that. But as you know, and as I lament, the vast, vast majority of money that's studying and using, especially any new devices, any new protocols, they're they're almost entirely on populations that have existing uh, illnesses, including the ones that are of major focus. And then what happens is that data then gets extrapolated. It's assumed to, carry over towards healthy populations, and they use things like sensitivity analyses to try to calculate what they think these other influences are, and
Mhm.
then what's left over applies to the rest of us. And I'm sorry, I come from technology. We can't like extrapolate all things from a model airplane to a commercial airplane.
Right.
We would rightly get, pilloried if the planes, don't work, right?
Right.
There's a lot of principles in common. It doesn't change the fact that you still need real world data. Still got to get it. And you got to care. You got to care about getting it. Anyway, all right, I'm going to get off my soapbox. Just had to mention that.
That's okay. I love it.
But that said, as we're starting our study, this other study is going on called Miami Heart. It's run by principal investigator Karam Nasir, great guy. And thank God he started it. And it's on asymptomatic people out of Florida who um, were, many of them are just healthy. They gathered a bunch of different data on them, and it's not longitudinal, which is to say there's not a second scan. There's only a first scan, but that's fine. If there's a first scan, that meant that once we had all of our first scans completed, we could actually have a matched control. We could look to their group and compare them to our group.
How many participants did they have, Dave? Just curious.
2,400,
Okay, so a larger group.
much larger. Yes. And that was good because what it meant was their pool of people would hopefully provide enough variety that statistically you could find what group within the group would match closely with our group. So, for example, the number of participants, and here I'm going to be kind of already walking a little bit into the analysis, but this part I should preface a little bit. We had 100 participants, as I mentioned. There were 80 of our 100 participants that were within the age range of the Miami Heart cohort.
Okay.
So that's where you start. You start by going, okay, you get those 80. Now, how close can we get a group of people inside of Miami Heart to match the attributes of those people of the 80? And the answer to that is surprisingly close, really close.
Wow.
But I didn't know this. I just knew the data existed. I didn't know if there would need to be further multivariant adjustments or anything along those lines. I had no idea. All I knew from the outside through most of last year was that the data existed and that it was just a matter of time until we could get a matched analysis done in-house inside of Lundquist. Now, again, I don't get to see any of these data. I just get to hear about it happening, and I have to wait until the big opening, just like if you can know a movie's getting made,
Right.
but you can't see any behind the scenes anything. You just have to show up at the premiere, right? So when you and I talked, it was shortly after I found out what those aggregates were and what Dr. Budoff would be presenting months from that time. So as is incumbent, even though I don't get to handle the raw data, I can't break the news. I can be aware of what the results are and that those, results will remain fixed until the point that they're actually presented. because I can be an author on the study. It's just that I'm an author that's removed. I'm blinded. This is where the first layer of blindedness comes from. I'm
Right.
blinded from what's going on inside of Lundquist on the analysis front. But as the funder, appropriately, I'm blinded from that end and have very limited influence at all with that part of the analysis. The whole point is for us to come together and agree on what the analysis is in advance, and then that analysis is executed with minimal amending or whatever in the process, unless it's very relevant and defensible, right?
Right.
But so then I get it. So then I have to wait. And then I finally find out when the conference is that's going to get presented. And that was last month. It was December 8th that this could get presented. So now what we could do is we could move to the slide deck that Dr. Budoff had, which I can screen share. And for those of you who are listening via audio, I'll talk out each of the things that are on the slides. But I worked this out with Vinnie to just have ready in advance. Let me see if I can do a screen share now.
So, folks,
right.
if you want to go over, if you normally watch this or listen to us on audio, we also put these no one pays attention to me on YouTube, but on this one, you might want to go to YouTube and look up this particular show and come in right at around 36 minutes and figure it out. All right, go on, Dave.
First, I just want to confirm you're able to, because I'm going to
Yeah.
make this full screen if it doesn't error out on me. There we go. All right, you're able to see that, all right?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. So to be fair, this is Dr. Budoff's presentation, not mine. And some of these slides I'm going to skip through, but I wanted to stay as authentic as possible and use what he had already had. So some of these I can't even do justice to, and I'll just be upfront about it. So these were his disclosures. As you can see, funding provided by Citizen Science Foundation. That's us. We did this. We crowdfunded this study, which is itself an amazing, I think, accomplishment that should be shared by everybody, but by small pockets to big pockets.
Yeah.
So he can talk to this and I can't. The slide we're on right now is talking about the quantifying of atherosclerosis with CCTA. And it's worth watching his talk on this because he's explaining why it's becoming so much more robust and reproducible with defined measures that you can build studies around this and defined a lot of the questions to be asked in advance. But he is one of the foremost experts on this in the world, which is why we were so excited to have him on board in the first place. It's also important to emphasize why lean mass hyperresponders are not those with familial hypercholesterolemia. This was something we decided to add just to add additional context for his colleagues, because many of his colleagues may not realize that there are these differences between them. I'd actually already talked about this a little bit earlier in the podcast, so if people want to look at the slide, they can, but I'm not going to repeat myself yet here.
Yeah.
These are the objectives, which I kind of went over before, but I think this one's worth repeating a little bit. So these are the bullet points. I'm just going to read them verbatim. While most individuals who adopt carbohydrate-restricted ketogenic diets for obesity or diabetes exhibit general improvements in all lipid parameters, LDL cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, and triglycerides, a subgroup termed lean mass hyperresponders exhibit extreme increases in LDL cholesterol. Lean mass hyperresponders are defined by LDL cholesterol in the FH range, along with high HDL cholesterol and low triglycerides. This triad tends to increase in lean, otherwise healthy individuals. And the aim of this study is to prospectively evaluate the plaque progression over the course of 1 year in 100 metabolically healthy lean mass hyperresponders and near lean mass hyperresponders on a ketogenic diet with LDL cholesterol of 190 and above. So the methods we're going into here, which is what I was talking about before, but now I can really fully unpack. So of the 80, we went ahead and I mentioned the criteria from earlier, LDL of 190 and above, HDL of 60 and above, and triglycerides of 80 and below. And they were matched 1-to-1 for age, gender, race, diabetes, mellitus, hyperlipidemia, hypertension, and past smoking to asymptomatic subjects from the Miami Heart cohort. Of course, our group follows a ketogenic diet, And the analysis was focusing a lot on total plaque score, total stenosis score, and segment involvement score. Don't worry if you're getting a little lost on that. I'll come back to that in a moment.
Yeah.
And here's the matchup, Vinny. And this one, I mean, there's two slides that I definitely hope people look at. This is one of them, because when I saw this for the first time, given everything I just told you about before, where I was like, ugh, I don't know how much they're going to match everything up, I could not believe my eyes.
It almost looks like a mirror in some places.
It really does. So the age is identical, 55.5 to 55.5. The body mass index is the other biggest difference besides LDL. But this actually goes back to the lipid energy model I was talking about before, Vinny.
Yeah.
I expected our group would have lower BMI, and that's at 22.5 versus Miami Heart, which is at 25.8. We'll come back to that in a moment. But now look at everything else. Male percentage, identical, 47% in both cohorts. White, Asian, Indian, Hispanic, these are all identical in percentage. And the blood pressure, slightly higher for the keto group, even though still excellent at 117/76.
Yeah, but
versus Miami Heart.
listen, let me just, for the audience, you're saying slightly higher. It's
practically identical, right?
Scientific. I mean, in medicine, that's not so infinitesimal. You might as well say it's another mirror.
Right. And
Because
the only reason I mention that is because some people immediately latched on to HSCRP of 0.5 to 0.7, which, as you know, Vinny, is, I mean, we're talking about such, or A1C of 5.4 to 5.5. So they're pretty, like, you look at all these together.
People really tried to latch on to those numbers.
Yeah.
Based on what? I mean,
based on trying to find some
if
way in
one
which the
person
Miami
had
Heart
been different on either side, it could have thrown it the other way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So we'll get to that in just a second.
Okay. All right. That's ridiculous, but go on.
Now that you've seen these numbers, let's go back up to the lipids. For our group for keto, they have a total LDL total cholesterol of 369 with an LDL of 272. 272, Vinny.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let that sink in here for a second. In fact, I think, oh no, I don't have the thing set. So, HDL, unsurprisingly, very high at 90, triglycerides of 64. Now, on the Miami Heart side, it looks very different, as we would expect it. Total cholesterol is 205. LDL cholesterol is an average of 123. You know, I mentioned earlier the population average tends to be 120 to 130, which is right where mine was.
Right.
That's this Miami Heart cohort, right? And their HDL cholesterol is not as high as the keto group, but it's still very high at 63.
Yeah.
And triglycerides low at 96. So again, I just have to just say one more time, this is so tight. I couldn't believe it myself when I was looking at it. I was stunned that they were able to get this close of a match.
Yeah.
Okay. And yes, he had a little highlight here specifically for the LDL. These are the results. And I'm going to read the bullets verbatim. The matched mean age was 55.5 with the mean LDL cholesterol of 272. And our max, Vinny, our max participant had an LDL cholesterol of 591. That's well into the FH territory I was telling you about before.
Yeah.
And they were at this for a mean average of 4.7 years. It's nearly half a decade at a duration of these metrics, right?
Right.
There was no significant difference in coronary plaque burden as compared to Miami Heart controls, who had the mean LDL of 123. And it's worth noting, as says in this bullet, that the pre-keto, our keto group, had a nearly identical LDL cholesterol of 122. So they didn't start with, like, say, a lower LDL cholesterol than Miami Heart and then move to a higher such that it would be expected to counterbalance in some way. They were nearly the same as Miami Heart when they started out. Now, the next two bullets are a little difficult to explain to an audience because it's using interquartile. But basically, I'll just say the coronary artery calcium score was also statistically, did not have a statistically significant difference. The total plaque score, which I'll just call TPS, also was very comparable. And you'll see this in the next graph that I'm going to show. But the last bullet says no relationship of LDL cholesterol elevations and plaque. And this next graph puts it pretty well. I'm going to skip this one. Here it is. This is the graph. It's a little complicated, so I'm going to unpack it. But the graph we're looking at is labeled LDL cholesterol versus total plaque score, TPS. So I'm going to unpack this for you, Vinny. I want you to keep me extra layperson. You ready?
Okay, go.
Okay, on the left side are our keto folks, the lean mass hyperresponders. This N equals 80 means there's 80 of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And on the right side is the Miami Heart cohort. They also have the same 80. Now, there are two things being shown. LDL-C is LDL cholesterol. That's the blue wiggly line that you see. And this, I guess you could call it green, TPS stands for total plaque score. So what we're doing is we have this sorted going from left to right, where you can see the total plaque score going up as you go to those who have the highest amount on this axis at the bottom. There's not something missing here. There's literally a 0 total plaque score for the lean mass hyperresponders up to 40, which is the halfway point.
Right.
And then it goes up from there to a total plaque score of 1. You can see the axis over here, and then 2, and then 3, etc. Such that there's all of them are in a single digit. So now let me pause and explain what a total plaque score is. When they do these scans, they choose in advance of the study, at the beginning of the study, before anything is assessed, they choose 15 sites, locations in the coronary arteries of interest. So they're going to check. Think of special, where you live, Vinny, there's a freeway system. And in the freeway system, there's some places that are more prone to accidents than others.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you were to try to examine the improvement of the freeway system, they might choose to look specifically at those sites. That's how they're doing these scans, is they know exactly where those locations are. They're often at bifurcations, which means where it divides into two different arteries, right? Or places where it bends tightly, where there's more shear stress.
Right.
And at each of these 15 sites, they go there. The reader of the scan goes there to that site. And it's a blinded scan. They don't know who it belongs to. But they go to these sites and then they assess whether or not they see plaque. And if they don't, then it's a score of 0. Or if they see plaque and then they rate it from 1 to 3. So a mild amount of plaque would be a 1, a medium would be a 2, a heavy amount would be a 3, right?
Right.
So with 15 sites and having a score from 0 to 3, that means you can have a maximum score of 45. So if all 15 sites, there's no detectable level of plaque at all, then you have a total plaque score of 0.
Right.
That's most of the people in this lean mass hyperresponder cohort, right?
Well, it's plus 40. I mean, it's more than half of them.
Yeah, more than half, right. Then you have a TPS of 1 for, I don't have the scores broken out. Other people have done this online because you can figure this out pretty easily because these lines are divided and you can actually count them. But you have a number of people who have a total plaque score of 1. That means that there's a mild detectable plaque somewhere in the coronary arteries at one of those sites of interest. Then it goes to 2 and so forth. And all of them being at single digits and below completely shocked me the first time I saw it, but there wasn't any comparator group. I was surprised that at a population level, the total plaque score was what it was, because this is a group of 55-year-olds. Vinny, you know that as you get later into middle age, and frankly,
Sure.
when you've got a majority male population that you're looking at, it's going to be more likely that there's more detectable levels of plaque, of development going on. Now, that said, again, we didn't have a comparison. Who would we compare them to? Well, now we go over to the other side. We go over to Miami Heart. There's a large number of them that had 0 plaque score, although it wasn't up to half. It's less than half that had a 0 total plaque score. Then it starts to graduate up from there, and they did have more people that were in double digits. They actually had 4, whereas we had 1. And I don't have this graph in here, but if you look at area under the curve, if you literally like recreate this chart and overlap ours with Miami Heart, they actually have lower area under the curve. There's less total plaque score altogether for the lean mass hyperresponder group than the Miami Heart group.
Interesting.
Now, I want to emphasize, it's not a statistically significant difference. It's a trend. It's trending in the opposite direction. I don't bring this up to say that our cohort is doing better, but I do bring it up. I do bring it up because if it's not trending in the direction that would be expected. In other words, if it were the reverse, if the lean mass hyperresponder cohort, go back up. There we go. If the lean mass hyperresponder cohort had a higher area under the curve than the Miami Heart cohort, even if still statistically insignificant,
right?
My guess is a lot of people would say, okay, so maybe it's going slower, but it's still going. That's still what's happening. Like maybe it's not as high as we would expect for the comparison, but they probably are still in worse shape, all things considered, right? So I bring it up only in that regard because that was another thing that shocked me at the time. I thought it would be potentially just closer to the same given the population size, but I didn't know for sure.
So in other words, if you took another 80 on both sides, it'll end up the same way, but it could be slightly different based on the people you choose, right? I mean,
it's possible. And that's
it's possible, but probabilities are very low. I mean, just from what I'm looking at here and just from what I'm seeing, it's impressive. Yeah. I would have look, when you start looking at LDL numbers that high, you would think, well, there's going to be something there. But
right.
there's no there.
And this is why we've got to get to the other part that keeps getting missed by a lot of people, but that I wanted to be sure to unpack for you, is the blue line. So LDL cholesterol, these are tracking with the same participants that you're seeing the total plaque score with.
Right.
So what are we looking at here? Well, if you were to think that LDL cholesterol would generally track with the presentation and progression of plaque, then sure, this line might be going up and down a lot, but it would likely go up and down moving upward.
Right.
Because these would correlate. The levels of LDL cholesterol, regardless of whether you kept them at low levels or high levels, would likely correlate with total plaque score. But that's not at all what we see. In fact, that's what was reported on with these findings, is that there was no correlation. And I mean really no correlation. These are far along all over the map.
Right.
And as you can see, we do have some folks, you can see it right here in the LDL cholesterol axis line in our cohort, that are in the 400s. And most that are in the 400s are on the left side of the 0 total plaque score line, including the person who's the highest. You can see them right here. The one we just mentioned.
They're not registering, not even a 1.
Yeah, there's not a single total plaque score of any kind. That
see, the top 1, 2, 3, the top 3 do not correlate. Don't they're in that first 45 or so that have a 0. Or am I reading that wrong?
No, you're correct. Now, I've got to give the standard caveat as
Okay.
Dr. Budoff would want me to do, as our research partners want us to do, and as is appropriate, which is, while you may be right now hearing everything I'm saying and it sounds fantastic, and you might be like, okay, this is the last video I ever need to watch. I can actually stop here. I can ignore my doctor. I can, etc. No, I will emphasize this is preliminary. Literally literally the first glimpse of data that we have.
Yeah.
And it needs to be built on. This is preliminary. We need to have more and more data that's upcoming so that we can get a better and better picture. But do I think this is at least good news? Is it encouraging? At least does it move the needle a tiny bit? I would say so. It's definitely, certainly there was another scenario, Vinny, where I'm calling you 2 years ago and I'm like, Budoff canceled the study. There were too many people that were coming in with a high level of total plaque score before we even got to do a match.
Right.
Because that can happen, and the study can get halted early for ethical reasons. If it turns out a bunch of scans coming in being red were well into the double digits, which would have been more expected for total milligram years of how high these levels were. This LDL of 272, Vinny, and the total years of 4.7, that was part of the jaw-dropping news.
Yeah.
Was our entry criteria is 190, and your total time on the diet need to be 2 years. So I didn't know how much above that it would be. But 272 at 4.7 years, I've already done the math. That means this group has 700 milligram years more than this group, more than Miami Heart. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
So that it's a graph that certainly I think we'll be reflecting on a lot if it continues to be supported by further evidence. It's something that I hope will draw more attention and interest to doing this research, but that'll of course wrap into the standard continue to work with your doctor. But for those who are interested, this is getting published soon, this match analysis. And of course, the longitudinal analysis will be completed next month in February. And hopefully that'll get published soon as well.
So Dave, let's talk shop for a second. I, as you know, crowdfunded my first movie.
Yeah.
Got $250,000. I had to throw a lot of my own money in it at the end to get it finished. And that money came back in a big way. And instead of pocketing the money, I don't feel like I own that money, even though it's my money. I've always considered myself the custodian of that money. So I used that money to put out the second documentary, and largely figured I would never see it after Fatter Documentary 2. Well, dumb luck, the money came back again. So still not feeling like it was my money, just being the custodian of that money, I did Beyond Impossible and thought, okay, this will be the catalyst to get rid of that money. Well, as fate would have it, the money came back again. And I'm getting ready to put out my fourth documentary, which means at some point I'm going to lose all the money, which is fine with me because the money is not mine to begin with. The money is there to educate other people. And I've taken it upon myself to do that. Folks, I'm not patting myself on the back. I am not Mother Teresa, but fair is fair. Where's money going to come from for you? Because no one gave you money back. You see, you did a study. Now the money is gone. You don't get money back at the end of the study if it's a successful study like it is with the documentary. Will this be enough for the NIH or anyone else who's being funded by big everything, big pharma, big food, how do we move on? Do we go to Verta Health and beg them for money? Where do we go? I say we because I feel like I'm part of this in a weird way. Where do we go to continue this? Because this can't just die here, right?
No, I mean you're obviously whether whether you meant to or not, I don't know if you knew this, literally 2 days ago, we did the hard launch for the Collaborative Science Conference, which we're having here in Las Vegas. And it's a fundraising event. It's literally just to benefit the Citizen Science Foundation, the very foundation entity I was telling you about, in order to do a sister study to this study. We know we need a lot more this time because the biggest two complaints are both getting addressed. And for what it's worth, that I'm gonna cede some to like you when you're doing science, you can't just be dismissive of all criticism. And you have to acknowledge what you did with what you had at the time and then what it is that you can do now. And what we were limited by at the time was what an IRB would approve. An IRB is a group of individuals that determine if it's ethical to study
Right.
this group. And that was a challenge to get through IRB. It took us 9 months to get through IRB because I mean, there's lots of technical reasons, but there was always an issue with this being a group that's considered extremely high risk. And
Right.
so even if it's a natural history study, which is another way of saying you're just watching what they're already doing, so there shouldn't be a big ethical consideration. If they're already refusing treatment, all you're doing is you're saying, can we at least get a scan on you while you're doing this thing you're determined to do?
Right.
It still doesn't change the fact that you still have to go through this approval process. Well, that's part of what I say back to people who go, well, but this is a really healthy group. It's a healthy group, and so they wouldn't have been expected to develop plaque. By the way, though, I do emphasize back to them. I say, so wait, do you feel like the children of Brown and Goldstein should all be on a carnivore diet? Like that would help them? There's some disconnects in that logic there. But
Right.
setting that aside, could we go with a more real world population that expands off to people who are more metabolically healthy, but who also see higher LDL, but for example, might have lower HDL and higher triglycerides? Possibly. The other thing is we did a matched control, as I described now, but there's a lot of reason to suggest shooting for a control group that's attached to the study. Now, they tell me that we could pull this off with 40 in each group. They said this with the first study, by the way, that given the exposure levels, 40 people in each group would be more than enough given how high the LDL levels are. But I think I told you this at the time. Even though it was my first ask, and even though it was already ambitious, I said, I want 100. I want 100 because 100 isn't just 2.5 times 40.
Right.
When you hear a study about 40 people, what do you think? You're like, that sounds interesting.
Yeah.
When you hear a study about 100 people with LDL of 272 average, that I think has a lot more meaningful impact. So with this companion study, I want the same thing. I don't want 40 and 40. I want 100 and 100. I want 100 people in our group, and I want 100 control. And you know what? The worst that can happen is I'm told no, that I can't raise enough money to make it happen. But I have to tell you, Vinny, there's a lot of people that are really helping to support this research. Obviously, I hope that includes many in your audience.
Well, is there a place they can go now to
Yes,
donate
the,
or?
the citizensciencefoundation.org is
Okay.
our website, and you can donate. You can donate now. It's literally how we've done it. It's been donations. Every donation counts, and it matters if you believe in this research, if you believe in what we're doing. But on top of that, there's a bigger thing now, which is you're proving this works. You're proving that. I mean, how many times are we just saying to ourselves, I wish they would do a study on X or Y? And you know, even before you know anything about this landscape, you know it won't get done because it's more of an interest. If it's something that has to do with eating real world food that's good for you, that's not in some package that doesn't have some business case attached to it, you know the likelihood that there's going to be a rigorous study that proves how good that is for you
Yeah.
You know that's just not going to happen. So you got to do what we've done. You like you said with your movies, you crowdfunded and successfully did these movies that have reached so many people
Yeah.
to bring them up to speed. And you were crazy enough to have some engineer in one of your movies, just to even talk about lipids.
Yeah.
Whatever happened to that guy? I mean, is he even
Hmm.
still doing lipids? I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Oh, here he is. I mean, what? Wait, what? But look, Dave, I mean, and you know me, I'm a big, I will champion you for anything. You know, you called me, hey, can you get me on Dr. Drew? You know how many people call me and say, hey, can you get me on Dr. Drew? With you, it's like I went to Drew's house and said, Drew, you got to have this guy on. And I think the first time he said, you need to come on with him. And I was like, oh, Drew, don't do this to me. And I did. And then after Drew kind of vetted you, I mean, you should go there again, you know, with this. You should go back to Drew. I think he would be interested in this. And that can help you gain. Do you know how much money you might need to do the 100 and 100? Any idea?
I'm I'm pretty sure it's going to come.
Half a
See,
mil?
I'm afraid to say the
Three quarters
number.
of a mil? What
Yeah, it's probably going to be around 1 million. I'm
oh,
afraid to say that number because I feel like people feel it's too far away. But
no,
I
no, no, no. Listen, what you did before felt too far away, Dave.
right,
You
exactly.
have
And
to say it. You have to talk it into existence. I
yeah,
know I sound like some woo-woo guy when I say that, but I've talked so many things in my life into existence. If it's going to take $1 million, that's what it's going to take. I always say $1 million is nothing. When I was a kid, I wanted to be as rich as Thurston Howell III, which was $2 million. That's what he had, the guy on Gilligan's Island. $2 million. Okay, there's billionaires running around today.
right.
Thurston Howell III would be considered broke in today's world, right? You
Yeah,
need $1 million, you need $1 million. That's what it's going to take. But we need to have these things. This is near and dear to my heart. I have friends who are hyper responders, right? And they don't really worry about it. They've lost so much weight, and you know, just like your group, the triad, the triglycerides are low, the HDLs are high, the LDLs are in the 200s, right? I have two friends like that. I want to know. So why wouldn't I give? Why wouldn't anyone else want to give? Tell them where they could go to give, Dave.
it's so right now it's citizensciencefoundation.org. We have a drive for the first 100, which is already getting matched by um another anonymous donor that's come forward. And that's part of the trick, Vinny, is the bigger pocket donors, they like to know that I'm not just walking up to them and saying, write me a check and, you know, I'm going to go to 9 other of your friends and then have them write me a check and then my work is done. They respond more to donations coming in from the public where they can be a match.
Right.
So they feel like their money is working and we're working. We're working for their money. So I can say that I don't know how many of these donors I can get, but I bet I can keep getting more donors like this. And that's why this current one, I want to, you can actually look right now on Citizen Science Foundation and look at where our bar is from when I started. Yeah, we're at 67,000. I actually didn't check into this recently, so we just had a boost. We're at 67,796 to the
Just for people.
$100,000 goal.
Yeah,
Right.
just for people. Yeah, that's amazing.
So and so when we hit that 100, that'll unlock the donor that we're 20% of the way there.
Right.
Right? We're 20% of the way there. Then we have the conference that's coming up. I set the goal modestly at 50K. I am, of course, I'm hopeful that that's intentionally modest enough to where we're going to blow past it.
Yeah.
I think we will. I think some of the and again, I'm telling you, it doesn't matter. I know you hear this a lot that every dollar counts. Truly, every dollar counts. If you're like listening to this and the best you could give is like, $5 or $10, you just have to trust that there are so many other people that are thinking the same thing and doing the same thing, and it adds up. And yes, then there are just some amazing, kind-hearted people who are able,
Yeah.
who can really, And a lot of times it depends on how much it's helped them personally. A lot of times it's family members of theirs who are benefiting from this research. But this, I hate to put it this way, this is the only way it gets done.
Yeah.
I can say this more confidently now than I could before, because think about it. Before, they didn't know me from anybody. I was just some engineer. Now I am in fact a published, I could claim researcher. I still prefer the title of engineer above all other titles, but I actually could go off of published work and pursue a PhD if I wanted to, just from existing stuff that we published. I now know a lot of these lipidologists, high-level lipidologists by names. I still cannot get them to do their own studies or to collaborate with us on studies or to help push their research centers into this yet. And so this is how it happens. It really is how it happens. The good news, Vinny, is unlike before, we have the existing relationship. All of that work that we had to go through to build, the contracts with Lundquist, the vetting of things, even the IRB. The IRB, I expect to go way faster this time. Why? Because we have their data.
Yeah.
Data that they already approved.
Hey, we didn't kill anyone. Let's move ahead, right?
Yeah. They've seen that this is successful. They can see the risk stratification from what we have already in hand. And just to put it very plainly, it is 100% fair for anybody to say X is just one study, right? A study can absolutely be groundbreaking and pivotal. It can be pivotal, but it can't be definitive. You need to reproduce. You need to replicate. And that's fair. That's a fair thing to ask for. And that's literally what we're doing right now. We're saying, let's do it. Let's make this companion study. If it replicates, if it further reinforces the findings, that's where paradigms can truly shift.
Dave, let me just say this. Once you get, not if, but once you get to 500,000, let's come back on the show and we'll do some, you don't have to be on for an hour. We'll bring you on a Monday show with Anna and we'll do some rah-rah and get some, just keep it going. We just have to keep it going in that. So once you get to 500,000, let's keep you going, man. Let's get you there. Because when people start to see success, like, oh shit, this is going to happen. Then they'll give.
Right.
Let's just keep doing that.
It's why I didn't want to say the million. I don't want people to feel like it's that far away.
It's not. A million happens like that.
Every what is it? The journey of 10,000 miles starts with the first step. Yeah. Guys, we're already almost 2,000 miles in, right? So I myself, I didn't even know that we were as far along as we were until I just saw what that is. So yes, that's what it takes. It takes raindrops coming down to eventually fill up the pool, right?
Look, there's a guy, I was talking to a guy who several times he went past 700 shots on a skeet field before he missed. Most people can't get to 25 straight, right? 50 straight. There are these crazy individuals that have streaks for 800, 900. I was asking this guy, he's got past 700 several times. And I'll say, well, how does this start? He goes, it starts with a miss.
Yeah.
Right. And you never think of it that way. It's like, oh, wait, these guys do miss every now and again. It's like, yeah, every streak starts with a miss. And then you have 2 in a row and 3 in a row. And before you know it, it's like snowflakes. You're at 700, right? You have a pile. So, and guys, you talk to guys that hit 200, 300, 400 free throws without a miss, right? How did this start? Well, it started with a miss. That's when you start counting, right? So there you are. You're there. You're moving again. You're not even at a miss. You're at 60-something thousand. So keep it going. Hang on, Dave. I want to say goodbye to you off the air. Folks, if you like what's going on here, you know what to do. We all go shopping on Amazon. Before you go to Amazon, go to VinnieTortorich.com, click through the banner. It puts coal in the fire, gets my train down the track. Also, rate and review this podcast unless you're one of the haters who are listening just to hate on us. You guys don't review and don't give us the 1 star. Everyone else, give us the 5 star and give us a nice review. Go to citizenscientist.org. Did I say it right, Dave?
Citizen Science Foundation.
Foundation.org. Citizen Science Foundation.org. $5, $10. Look, if you give him $20, that's like 4 people gave him $5. Do that. Just give him $20. And you could cover for the other assholes that are not giving him anything. So we can all do it that way. See, Dave, that's how you sell stuff. We came into the show with a little music, so we're going to go out with a little different music this time. Did that play without me wanting it to play? I think we have the song here. Maybe we do. Maybe we're going to find out. We're going to learn together here whether we have the song or not. On behalf of Dave Feldman, my name is Vinnie Tortorich. Put life into living and do it with these guys. Yeah, Manfred Mann. Doing a Bruce Springsteen song.
Blinded by the lights, wrapped up like a douche, another runner in the night. Blinded by the lights, wrapped up like a douche, another runner in the night. Blinded by the lights.
We're out. Wait, let me turn this off, Dave. Hang on.